The alien begged, "Don't eat me." But the human did something no one expected. The forest was quiet in that way only deep American wilderness could be. Endless trees pressing together, their crowns blotting out the sun until everything below swam in shifting patterns of shadow and green light. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Every step was muffled by layers of fallen needles, and the occasional bird call broke the silence like a ripple across a still pond. Ethan Walker, a wildlife researcher who had spent the better part of his 32 years hiking in places like this, felt at home among the silence. He had set out early that morning with his backpack, camera, and notepad, searching for signs of wolves rumored to be returning to this part of Montana. But now he stood frozen, his breath caught halfway in his chest, staring at something that had no place in the catalog of North American wildlife. Curled up at the base of a tree trunk, shivering like a wounded bird, was a girl. Or at least, something that looked like one. She was tiny, no taller than a child, her limbs delicate to the point of fragility. Her hair, an impossibly bright gold, shimmered even in the dim, filtered light. Her skin was pale as porcelain, almost luminescent, and her large eyes flicked open when she heard him. They were not human eyes. They gleamed too wide, too reflective, like liquid silver catching every glint of light. Her mouth opened, trembling. The words came out halting, but unmistakably clear. Please don't eat me." Ethan blinked, stunned. "What?" She flinched, pressing her back against the bark as though he were a predator about to pounce. Her hands, small, with fingers longer and thinner than any human child's, clutched at her knees. She whispered again, voice broken with terror, "Please, don't devour me." For a moment he thought he'd lost his mind, that maybe he was delirious from lack of sleep or dehydration. But the fear in her voice, the way she shook with each breath, it was real. This was no hallucination. Ethan dropped to one knee slowly, careful not to move too fast. He set his backpack down and raised both hands in the air, palms open. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." Her silver eyes narrowed with suspicion. She clearly didn't believe him. "You're human," she whispered, like the word itself was poisonous. "Humans, they kill. They destroy. They eat." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what she was, not yet, but the fear in her voice struck something primal inside him. He spoke gently, like talking to a wounded animal. "Look, I don't know what you've been told, but that's not what I'm here for. I don't hurt people. I study animals, trees, rivers, nature. That's all." She trembled harder, muttering words in a language he didn't know. Then she looked up again, her small frame shivering against the roots of the tree. If you don't eat me, why are you here?" Ethan hesitated. How do you explain to something not from this world that you were just doing field work, trying to count wolves? But he found himself answering anyway. "I'm here to learn, to understand, to protect." He forced a small smile, even though his heart hammered in his chest. "What about you? Where did you come from?" Her lips trembled, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than terror crossed her face. Loneliness. She glanced skyward, through the trees, toward the faint daylight above. "I fell." Ethan frowned. "Fell? From what?" She shook her head quickly, clutching tighter to her knees, as if the answer was too dangerous to speak aloud. For several long moments, the only sound was the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Ethan could see that her breathing was shallow, rapid. She was terrified, but she wasn't running. That gave him hope. "Okay," he said softly, taking his water bottle from the side pocket of his bag. He unscrewed the cap and placed it on the ground between them, nudging it forward just enough for her to see. "You're shaking. You need water. It's safe. See?" He took a sip himself, then set it down again. Her eyes tracked every motion. Slowly, hesitantly, she stretched out a hand. Her fingers quivered as she touched the bottle, then snatched it back as if expecting it to burn her. Ethan didn't move. After a long pause, she picked it up and sniffed the opening. Finally, she tipped it against her lips. The way she drank, cautiously at first, then greedily once the first taste hit her tongue, told Ethan just how desperate she was. She gasped softly when she finished, then set the bottle down and curled her arms around herself again. "Not poison," she murmured, almost in disbelief. Ethan's smile widened. just slightly. Told you. Her eyes studied him again, still suspicious, but with a crack in the wall of terror that had surrounded her since he first saw her. She was trying to reconcile what she had been taught with what she was seeing now. Finally, her voice came, small but steady. Why would you help me? The question hit him harder than he expected. He didn't have a simple answer. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way she looked so fragile, so utterly out of place in this forest. Maybe it was the loneliness in her silver eyes. Because you're alive, he said at last. And that's reason enough. Her lips parted as if she didn't know what to say. She hugged herself tighter, gaze flicking toward the forest shadows. For the first time since he had seen her, she wasn't begging him not to eat her. And in that silence, something shifted. Ethan didn't know who she was, or where she had come from. But one thing was already clear. Whatever had taught her to fear humans, whatever had made her believe he would devour her, was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, he was the only one who could prove it. The forest around them felt different now, heavier with possibility. The afternoon light began to dim, soft beams slanting through the canopy in golden stripes. Ethan felt the weight of the forest pressing in around them, not hostile, but heavy, as if the trees themselves were listening. He stayed crouched a few feet away from her, careful not to close the distance too quickly. The small alien hugged her knees, her hair falling like sunlight over her shoulders. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she broke the silence with a whisper so low it barely carried. They'll come. Ethan's brow furrowed. Who? Her silver eyes flicked nervously to the shadows. The hunters. They will track me. They always do. A cold ripple ran through Ethan's chest. Hunters? You mean your people? She shook her head violently, strands of hair catching the fading light. Not mine. Enemies. They want to take me back. Tear me apart. Use what I am. Her trembling worsened until Ethan could almost feel it through the air. He leaned closer, voice firm but calm. Listen to me. You're safe here, okay? I won't let anyone hurt you. The words came out before he had time to second-guess them. Promises were dangerous, especially promises made in ignorance. But something about the fear in her eyes made it impossible to say anything else. She shook her head. You don't understand. They're stronger than you. They're faster. You can't stop them. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't a soldier. He had no weapon beyond a pocket knife and a heavy flashlight in his pack. But the thought of leaving her defenseless here, hunted by something unseen, sent adrenaline spiking through his veins. What's your name? He asked, trying to ground the moment in something human, something real. She hesitated, then whispered, Lyra. The sound of it lingered in the air, delicate and foreign, like a melody that didn't belong to this world. Lyra, he repeated softly. I'm Ethan, and I'm not leaving you out here alone. Lyra's eyes glistened. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but the words never came. Instead, her gaze darted past his shoulder, suddenly sharp, alert. Ethan, she breathed. They're here. He spun instinctively, heart hammering. The forest stretched in every direction, shadows deepening with dusk. At first he saw nothing, just the same trees, the same ferns and moss. Then he heard it, a sound out of place, a faint crack, the snap of a branch under deliberate weight. Someone, or something, was moving through the woods. Ethan crouched lower, adrenaline surging. Stay behind me, he whispered. Lyra clutched his sleeve with surprising strength for someone so small. No, they'll see you. They'll kill you. Her desperation was raw, but Ethan forced a grim smile. Not if we move first. He grabbed his backpack and pulled her gently to her feet. She stumbled, her legs too delicate, too unsteady, but he steadied her quickly. She weighed almost nothing in his grip. They began moving through the underbrush, Ethan guiding her along the narrow deer path he'd followed earlier. The forest felt different now, no longer neutral, no longer simply alive with birds and insects. It was hostile, every shadow hiding potential danger. Behind them, the sounds grew clearer. More than one, two, maybe three sets of footsteps. Careful, controlled, hunting. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't armed. And yet, every fiber of him screamed that he couldn't let them take her. Lyra, he whispered as they pushed through a thicket. What do they want with you? She stumbled again, panting. My blood. My kind we can heal. They want it. They'll bleed me until there's nothing left. The words chilled him more than the coldest mountain night. He looked down at her, this fragile being who had begged him not to eat her, who had thought humans were monsters. And now she was hunted like prey for something she never chose to be. Branches scraped his arms as he pulled her forward. The noises behind them grew closer, low, deliberate movements, never rushing, always steady, like predators that knew their quarry couldn't escape. Finally, they broke into a small clearing. Moonlight spilled down in pale silver beams, washing the grass in ghostly glow. Ethan's mind raced. He had to think. Wolves use terrain, cover, obstacles to survive. He could too. Up, he said quickly, pointing to a fallen tree trunk tilted against another. Climb. Lyra shook her head. I can't. Yes, you can. He boosted her up, her small hands clawing for purchase. With effort, she scrambled onto the log. Ethan followed, pulling himself up behind her. From there they could see more of the clearing, and the figures finally stepping into the open. They weren't human. Not fully. They were tall, their frames stretched too long, movements unervingly smooth. Their faces were hidden by dark masks, their bodies wrapped in flexible armor that seemed to drink in the moonlight. In their hands, weapons glimmered with faint light, unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. 3 of them. Lyra's breathing hitched. It's them. One of the masked figures tilted its head, as if savoring the moment. A voice, distorted and mechanical, rolled across the clearing. Return her, or die with her. Ethan's muscles tensed. He felt Lyra shaking beside him. Her fear was real, palpable, but so was his resolve. He might not have a weapon, might not have training, but he wasn't about to hand her over. He leaned close to her ear. Stay low, no matter what happens. Her silver eyes widened, tears threatening to spill. They'll kill you. Maybe, he said, forcing a steadiness he didn't feel. But I'm not letting them take you. The figures began advancing, slow and certain, confident in their power. And Ethan Walker, just a man with no plan, no weapons, and no idea what he was up against, prepared to face them anyway. The clearing held its breath. The hunters moved with terrifying calm, their masked faces unreadable, weapons raised as if they had already decided how this would end. The faint glow of their blades shimmered unnaturally, humming with restrained energy. Ethan's pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to drag Lyra back into the trees and vanish. But the way the hunters moved, spreading out, boxing them in, told him they had done this before. There was no easy escape. Last chance, the distorted voice called again. Return the fugitive. Walk away alive. Lyra pressed herself against Ethan's side, her small fingers clutching his sleeve. Her whisper trembled like dry leaves in the wind. They never let witnesses live. Ethan swallowed hard. He had never faced death like this, staring down beings who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle. But looking at her, fragile, terrified, expecting the worst, ignited something raw inside him. If she truly believed every human was a monster, then this was the moment to prove her wrong. He drew in a breath, forcing his voice steady. You're not taking her. The nearest hunter tilted its head, as though amused by the defiance of a creature so insignificant. Then, without warning, it lunged. The world snapped into chaos. Ethan shoved Lyra to the side, leaping down from the log. The hunter's blade slashed where his chest had been, carving a glowing arc into the wood. Splinters burst, the smell of charred sap filling the air. Adrenaline blurred thought into instinct. Ethan grabbed the only weapon he had, his heavy flashlight, and swung with everything in him. The beam cracked against the side of the hunter's mask, jolting its head back. Sparks spat from the weapon in its hand as it stumbled, but it didn't fall. The second hunter was already moving, circling to cut off escape. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm and ran, dragging her into the undergrowth. Branches whipped his face, roots tore at his boots, but he didn't stop. The forest roared with their pounding footsteps, the hunters relentless in pursuit. Lyra stumbled beside him, her breath ragged. You can't fight them. Watch me. Ethan gritted. A beam of searing light split the trees, sizzling past his shoulder and scorching bark into ash. Ethan swore under his breath. pulling Lyra down as they tumbled behind a boulder. The night filled with the hunters' low, mechanical voices, communicating, strategizing. They weren't just predators. They were soldiers. Ethan forced his breathing quiet, pressing Lyra close to the rock. Her tiny body trembled against him. "They'll find us," she whispered. "Not if we move first." His mind raced. He had no gun, no armor, but the forest was his terrain. He knew how sound carried, how shadows had movement, how predators thought. He tracked wolves, studied mountain lions. These things were no different. Apex hunters, but hunters nonetheless. He grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground and hurled it deep into the trees. The sound cracked like a branch breaking under weight. Instantly, two hunters shifted, sweeping toward the distraction. The third lingered, scanning, its mask glowing faintly as it searched. Ethan didn't wait. He pulled Lyra by the hand, sprinting the opposite way. Her legs struggled to keep up, her breath wheezing. Still, she ran. They broke into another small glade, moonlight pouring across a fallen tree half rotted into the ground. Ethan hauled her over it, his muscles burning, and dropped behind the trunk. For a moment, silence. Just their breathing, ragged and heavy. Ethan pressed his hand over her trembling fingers. "You're okay," he whispered, more to convince himself than her. Lyra's silver eyes glistened. Why? Why are you doing this?" Ethan almost laughed, but it came out as a harsh exhale. "Because you asked me not to eat you, and I'm damn well not about to let someone else take you apart." Her lips parted, stunned by the absurd simplicity of his answer. But before she could speak, a shadow loomed. The third hunter had tracked them. It vaulted the log like it weighed nothing, landing with predatory grace. Its weapon hummed to life, a vibrating blade of blue-white energy. Ethan barely had time to react. "Down," he barked, shoving Lyra aside. The blade swept toward him. He rolled, the weapon slicing through moss inches from his face. Heat singed his cheek. Ethan scrambled to his feet, grabbing a broken branch thick as his forearm. It was pitiful compared to the hunter's weapon, but he gripped it like a spear. The hunter advanced, mechanical voice hissing. Pointless resistance. Ethan set his jaw. "Maybe, but it's mine." With a roar, he swung the branch, smashing against the hunter's mask. The wood splintered, but the force staggered the creature just enough. Ethan rammed forward, shoving with all his weight. The hunter stumbled back against the log. Sparks flared as its weapon carved into the wood, stuck for a split second. Ethan seized the chance, grabbing Lyra and dragging her into the trees again. Branches whipped past. Behind them, the hunter tore free with a metallic snarl. The forest lit with another beam of energy, scorching the air. They were running out of options. Lyra's voice was hoarse, panicked. "You can't save me, Ethan. You'll die." He tightened his grip on her hand, his chest burning, his lungs on fire. "Then I die trying." The words burst from him louder than he intended, raw and defiant, echoing through the trees. Lyra stared at him in shock, even as he pulled her onward. Somewhere deep inside her fear, a flicker of something else sparked. Hope, fragile and dangerous. And behind them, the hunters closed in, relentless, merciless. The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a maze of shadows and threats, each branch and hollow whispering of danger closing in. Ethan's legs screamed with exhaustion, but he didn't dare slow down. Lyra stumbled behind him, half carried in his grip, her breaths coming as sharp, ragged gasps. Behind them, the hunters moved like phantoms. No curses, no growls, just the relentless rhythm of predators who knew time was on their side. Each time Ethan thought they had gained ground, the glow of their weapons flared again in the dark, slicing through trees, scorching bark. "We can't keep running," Lyra whispered, her voice nearly lost in the rush of leaves. "I know," Ethan admitted. His chest burned. His body wasn't built for endless sprinting through tangled forest, not with a pack on his shoulders and a terrified alien clinging to his arm. They burst into another clearing, this one rimmed by jagged stones and moss. Moonlight drenched the open space, leaving them exposed. Ethan halted, scanning desperately for escape. No caves, no hollow logs, nothing but open ground and shadow. And then the hunters appeared. All three stepped into the clearing at once, forming a dark wall of intent. Their weapons hummed with lethal light. They had corralled them perfectly, like wolves driving prey to the slaughter. Lyra's hand slipped from Ethan's sleeve, her tiny body shivering as if the cold had finally claimed her. She sank to her knees, silver eyes brimming. "I can't run anymore." Ethan looked down at her, heart pounding. Her words cut through him, not because of the despair, but because of the resignation. She had expected this end all along. Maybe her whole life had been lived in fear of this moment. Running, hiding, hunted. He crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. This isn't over. Not until I say it is." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. They always win." Ethan's throat tightened. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was no hope. But giving up, handing her over, wasn't an option. Not when he'd seen the terror in her eyes, the loneliness. Not when she had begged him, with her first words, not to be devoured. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His body ached, his arms trembled, but he planted himself between her and the hunters. A man against monsters. A fool, maybe, but a fool who refused to move. The nearest hunter raised its weapon, energy pulsing along its length. "Step aside, or die." Ethan spread his arms wide. "You'll have to go through me." Silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the hunter lunged. The blade swept in a lethal arc, but before it could connect, a flash of blinding light tore through the clearing. It wasn't the hunters. It came from Lyra. She had collapsed forward, her small body trembling, and in her desperation, something inside her broke free. Her skin glowed white gold, her hair blazing like sunlight made flesh. The air itself shivered with the force, and a shockwave burst outward, slamming into the hunters. They staggered back, their masks sparking, weapons flickering under the sudden pulse of energy. The ground itself seemed to recoil, dust and leaves whipping into a spiraling halo around her. Ethan shielded his face with his arm, stunned. Lyra was glowing, fragile, radiant, otherworldly. And for the first time, the hunters faltered. One hissed through its mask, mechanical distortion crackling. "Contain her." But Ethan was already moving. He scooped her trembling form into his arms, her glow dimming as quickly as it had erupted. She was burning hot, her body racked with exhaustion. Her silver eyes fluttered open just long enough to whisper, "I didn't want you to see." "Doesn't matter," Ethan growled, holding her tighter. "We're getting out of here." The hunters recovered, closing in again, but now hesitation lingered in their movements. They had been forced back. They had been touched by her power, however briefly. And Ethan knew hesitation was the only weapon he had. He bolted toward the tree lean, Lyra cradled against his chest. The hunters followed, their pursuit fierce, but for the first time, not flawless. They weren't unshakable anymore. Branches lashed against him, the world blurring in speed and panic. Lyra clung weakly to his shirt, her glow fading to faint sparks, her strength spent. "Don't stop," she whispered. "If they take me, it's over." "I won't," Ethan swore. His lungs screamed, but his voice stayed hard, unbreakable. "Not while I'm breathing." Behind them, the hunters roared in their metallic tones, weapons tearing the night apart. But Ethan pushed forward, driven by a fire he didn't know he had. A man who had come into the forest looking for wolves was now running with something infinitely rarer in his arms, a reason worth dying for. He didn't know where the path would lead. He didn't know if they could outrun the hunters forever. But in that moment, something had shifted. Lyra wasn't just a frightened fugitive anymore. She was a spark, a secret power the hunters feared. And Ethan had seen it. The world would never look the same again. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, for two souls defying the odds, you know this is just the beginning. Stick around. There are so many more twists ahead in their fight for survival. The forest was heavy with silence after the blast. Ethan ran until his legs felt like stone, his chest tearing with every breath. When at last he stumbled into a ravine where the canopy grew so thick the moonlight barely reached, he collapsed to his knees, lowering Lyra carefully onto a patch of moss. Her glow had vanished. What little strength she had left was gone with it. Her skin was clammy, her breath shallow. She looked even smaller now, so fragile it broke something in him to see it. "Lyra," Ethan whispered, brushing damp strands of gold from her face. "Hey, stay with me. You're okay." Her silver eyes fluttered open, unfocused. She tried to smile, but it twisted into a weak grimace. I warned you." "What was that?" His voice was low, urgent. "That light. What did you do back there?" She coughed, the sound thin. "Not control. Reflex. My kind, when cornered. Sometimes it happens. Cost too much." Her eyelids drooped again, and Ethan's stomach knotted. She was burning herself out, just staying alive. He stripped off his jacket and wrapped it around her slight frame. The night air was colder here, and she shivered, even under the layers. He pulled his pack close, digging for anything useful. Protein bars, water, a rolled tarp. Nothing could mend exhaustion at this level, but he forced her to sip water anyway. "You need rest," he murmured, though rest was a luxury the hunters would never grant them. As if summoned by the thought, a distant metallic howl echoed through the trees. Ethan froze, every hair on his neck bristling. They were still coming. Lyra flinched at the sound, curling tighter into his jacket. They adapt. They always adapt. Ethan's hands tightened into fists. He wanted to believe her power had bought them time, but deep down he knew she was right. Hunters didn't abandon prey. They recalibrated. "Then we adapt faster," he said. Lyra's gaze drifted to him, sharp even through her weakness. "Why? You could leave me. Live." Ethan barked a laugh, bitter and incredulous. "Leave you? Out here, hunted like an animal? You think I could sleep at night knowing I walked away from that?" Her lips parted, and for a moment she just stared at him. He wondered if anyone had ever spoken to her like that. If anyone had ever chosen her, not because of what she was, but simply because she was alive. "Humans," she whispered, shaking her head as if bewildered. "You're not what I thought." Ethan leaned back against the ravine wall, exhaustion dragging at him. His body screamed to stop, to rest, but he forced himself alert. They didn't have time to break. "What did you think?" he asked quietly. Lyra's voice was a fragile thread in the dark. "Stories. Warnings. That humans devour worlds. That you eat flesh, drink blood. That you don't feel." Ethan felt a hollow ache open in his chest. He thought of all the things humans had done. Wars, pollution, cruelty. He couldn't deny parts of it. But sitting here, watching her tremble with fear of him, he realized what she'd been taught stripped away everything else. The laughter, the kindness, the love. "I'm not saying we're perfect," he admitted, voice raw. "We screw up. A lot. But we're not monsters, Lyra. Not all of us." For a long moment, she was silent. Then her small hand reached out, trembling, and touched his wrist. Just a brush, tentative. But it was enough. Ethan covered her hand gently with his own. The connection felt fragile, almost holy in its simplicity. In the middle of this dark, merciless forest, hunted by creatures beyond comprehension, they had found something. Trust, fragile but real. A sharp crack split the night. Ethan jerked his head up. Not a branch this time. A weapon. They were close again. He shoved his tarp into the dirt, pulling it over the both of them and tucking Lyra close. The smell of damp earth filled his lungs as he pressed flat against the ravine wall. Above, faint beams of light swept between trees. Voices hissed in that broken mechanical distortion, speaking in a tongue Ethan couldn't parse but understood well enough. They were triangulating. Lyra buried her face against his chest, her tiny frame quaking. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, heart hammering so loud he was sure the hunters could hear. Minutes crawled by like hours. Once, a shadow passed so close above them he could hear the static hum of its weapon. He didn't breathe. Neither did Lyra. At last, the footsteps faded. The forest exhaled. Ethan dared to lift the tarp. The clearing above was empty again, but he knew the reprieve wouldn't last. The hunters weren't retreating. They were spreading out, tightening the noose. Ethan met Lyra's weary eyes. "We can't stay here." She nodded faintly, her face pale. "Where will you go?" "There's nowhere safe." He stared at the endless trees, his mind racing. There had to be a way. He wasn't going to just roll over and die. Not for them. Not for her. "Then we make somewhere safe," he said firmly. "Even if I have to build it out of rocks and blood." Lyra blinked at him, startled by the fierce certainty in his voice. Slowly, Against all odds, a spark of something softened her features. Hope. For the first time, she whispered his name, not in fear, not in despair, but as if testing what it felt like. Ethan. And in the sound of it, he found strength enough to rise again. The night stretched on, endless and merciless. Ethan's muscles screamed with every step as he guided Lyra deeper into the forest, away from the ravine where the hunters had passed overhead. He moved with the instinct of a cornered animal, doubling back, circling, using streams to mask their trail. Lyra clung to his jacket, too weak to walk on her own. More than once, he had to lift her entirely, carrying her like a child through the trees. At last, when his strength frayed to breaking, he found a hollow beneath an ancient cedar. The roots curled into an arch that formed a natural shelter, narrow enough to hide them, strong enough to buy a little safety. He ducked inside with her in his arms and set her down gently on the soft bed of moss. For the first time since this nightmare began, silence returned. No footsteps, no metallic voices, only the whisper of wind through branches and the distant cry of an owl. Ethan sagged against the trunk, sweat cold against his skin. He had pushed beyond exhaustion, but stopping now felt like surrender. Still, he forced himself to focus on Lyra. She was pale, trembling, her breath shallow, yet her silver eyes stayed on him, watching every move. "You need warmth," he said. He stripped his flannel shirt, folded it into a pillow, and tucked it beneath her head. Then he pulled his jacket tighter around her, covering her small frame. She blinked slowly, voice fragile. "Why do you keep doing this?" Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know how to answer anymore. Because it was right? Because he couldn't stand the thought of her being taken? Or maybe because something in her eyes, the loneliness, the fear, had reached him deeper than he wanted to admit. "Because you matter," he said at last. The words came low, rough, but true. Lyra's lips parted. She seemed almost confused by the statement, as if it were a concept she had never heard before. Her silver eyes shimmered in the faint moonlight filtering through the roots. "Matter?" Ethan nodded. "Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what they want from you. You're alive. That's reason enough for me." Her gaze dropped, her small hands clutching the edges of his jacket. Silence lingered, heavy but not hostile. Slowly, she whispered, "My people, we don't believe that. Life is weighed, measured. You're only worth what you can give, what you can be used for." The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than the hunter's blades. Ethan leaned closer, voice steady. "Then they're wrong." Her eyes lifted back to his, glistening. For a long moment, neither spoke. Something fragile, dangerous, and undeniable grew in the quiet space between them. Finally, she asked, "Do all humans think like you?" Ethan exhaled a half-laugh, shaking his head. "No. Some are selfish. Some are cruel. But some believe what I do. That everyone deserves a chance. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Lyra studied him, as though trying to memorize every word. Then she reached out, timid, and laid her hand on his arm. Her fingers were so small, so delicate, it barely felt like contact. Yet the weight of it filled the hollow cedar with warmth. "Ethan," she whispered, tasting the name again like something sacred. He covered her hand with his own. His calloused palm dwarfed her fragile fingers, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the touch, as though drawing strength from him. For the first time since he'd found her, she wasn't trembling. Outside, the forest side, the danger hadn't vanished. The hunters were still out there, closing in. But inside the cedar's shelter, for one fleeting moment, they had carved out something untouchable. Ethan shifted closer, careful not to overwhelm her. "Lyra," he said softly, "what do you want? Not what they want from you. Not what you've been told. What do you want?" She froze. The question seemed to strike her deeper than any weapon. She stared into the shadows, lips trembling, as if she had never dared to think about it. Finally, her voice cracked. "I want to stop running. I want to be seen. Not as prey. Not as a resource. Just seen." Ethan's chest ached. He tilted her chin gently until her eyes met his. "I see you." Her breath caught. Her silver eyes shone brighter, wet with tears that slipped down her pale cheeks. She made no effort to hide them. For the first time, she let herself be vulnerable, and Ethan didn't look away. Their hands stayed joined, the silence between them alive with unspoken truths. He had meant only to protect her, to save her from the hunters. But here, in the stillness of the cedar, he realized the fight had already changed him. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was connection. Lyra shifted closer, curling against him. Her body was small, fragile, but her warmth seeped into him like fire against the night chill. Ethan wrapped an arm around her without thinking, pulling her gently against his chest. She let out a soft sigh, a sound almost too human, almost too intimate. "You feel safe." The word struck him harder than any hunter's weapon. He pressed his cheek against her golden hair, inhaling the faint, strange sweetness of her scent. "And you're not alone anymore." The forest outside stretched vast and merciless, but within the hollow roots of the cedar, they carved out something the hunters could never touch. Trust, tenderness, the fragile beginnings of love. For Ethan Walker, once a lone researcher lost in the wilderness, everything had changed. And for Lyra, who had believed humans were nothing but monsters, this night was the first time she began to believe in something else. Not just survival, not just escape, hope. The silence of the cedar shelter shattered with a distant rumble. Ethan tensed instantly, every muscle coiled. He knew that sound too well by now, the low hum of alien engines skimming the treetops. The hunters were back. Lyra stiffened against him, her silver eyes widening in fear. "They found us." Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, listening. The hum grew louder, then fractured into sharp beams of light sweeping across the canopy. Branches glowed white for a heartbeat before the beams passed, scouring the forest floor like knives of illumination. "They're scanning," Ethan whispered. "Stay low." But the cedar's roots, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The searchlights crawled closer. His chest pounded. They couldn't stay hidden forever. A metallic voice cracked through the air. "Specimen Lyra, 17. Relinquish yourself. Resistance is futile." The word struck Lyra like a blade. Her tiny body trembled violently. "They'll destroy you if you keep protecting me." Ethan crouched in front of her, gripping her shoulders. "Then let them try." Before she could protest, a blast of searing blue light tore through the trees. Bark exploded, smoke filling the air. The cedar shook violently, splinters raining down. "They know we're here." Ethan shouted. He grabbed her hand, yanking her into the open as the cedar's roots cracked apart. The night lit up with chaos. Drones the size of wolves swarmed between the trees, red eyes glowing, claws whirring. Above them, a sleek alien craft hovered, its hull bristling with weapons. Ethan fired his shotgun, the blast echoing like thunder. One drone sparked and crumpled, but three more lunged forward. He dragged Lyra behind him, heart hammering. "Go!" he shouted, shoving her toward the thicker undergrowth. "Run!" But Lyra froze. Her silver eyes blazed with a mix of terror and resolve. "No! If I keep running, you'll die. They want me, not you." Another drone leapt. Ethan turned just in time to take it head-on, swinging the butt of his shotgun into its metal skull. Sparks burst across his face. The impact rattled his bones, but he didn't let go. He jammed the barrel into its eye and pulled the trigger. The explosion lit up the night, but the fight left him staggering. The hovercraft's spotlight pinned them in a blinding white beam. Ethan shielded Lyra, teeth gritted. "Target acquired," the metallic voice boomed. A hatch in the belly of the ship slid open. A figure descended on a cable, armored head to toe in jagged steel, its mask shaped like a predator's skull. The hunter commander, twice Ethan's size, carrying a spear that shimmered with crackling energy. Lyra gasped, backing away. "He won't spare you, Ethan. He'll tear you apart." Ethan tightened his grip on the shotgun. His legs shook, his breath came ragged, but his voice burned with defiance. "Then he'll find I'm not so easy to break." The commander landed with a heavy thud that made the earth shudder. Its mask tilted toward Lyra. "Specimen. Return, or this human dies." The ultimatum hung heavy in the smoke-choked air. Lyra's face crumpled, torn between survival and the only person who had ever shown her kindness. Her voice broke. "Ethan, I can't let them kill you." He turned to her, eyes fierce. "And I can't let them take you." The commander surged forward. Ethan fired point blank, but the alien deflected the shot with its spear, sparks flying. In the next instant, The weapon's shaft slammed into Ethan's chest, sending him sprawling. His shotgun clattered away. Lyra screamed, rushing to him, but the commander's shadow loomed above them. Pain roared through Ethan's ribs, but he forced himself to stand. His vision blurred, blood in his mouth. Still, he spread his arms wide, shielding Lyra with his battered body. "You'll have to go through me first," he growled. The commander raised the spear high, energy crackling along its edge. Death stood a breath away, and then Lyra moved. Her tiny frame stepped out from behind Ethan, her silver eyes blazing with something fierce and ancient. She raised her hands, and for the first time, Ethan saw the truth. Her people had stripped her of weapons, but they hadn't taken what was inside her. Light erupted from her palms, pure, searing white, brighter than the hovercraft spotlight. It slammed into the commander like a tidal wave. The armored giant staggered back, its mask cracking, sparks pouring from its chest. The forest itself seemed to shake with the force of it. Ethan shielded his eyes, stunned. Lyra's golden hair whipped around her like fire in the storm. She looked both fragile and unstoppable, a childlike figure wielding the power of a star. With a final cry, she unleashed the last of her strength. The blast hurled the commander across the clearing, smashing him into a tree. His armor smoked, his mask shattered. Silence fell. Lyra collapsed instantly, her light flickering out. Ethan dove, catching her before she hit the ground. Her small body felt terrifyingly limp in his arms. "Lyra, stay with me." His voice broke as he cradled her against his chest. Her eyes fluttered half open, dim now, the silver fading. "I didn't want you to die." Ethan's heart tore in two. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering fiercely, "And I won't let you go. Not now. Not ever." Above them, the hovercraft shrieked with alarms. The hunters reeled in their wounded commander, retreating into the sky. Their ship roared away into the night, vanishing among the stars. The forest lay in ruins, smoke rising from shattered trees. Ethan knelt in the ashes, holding Lyra close, her golden hair tangled against his blood-stained chest. The battle was over, but the cost was carved into both of them forever. The forest was no longer the same. Where towering cedars once stood, blackened trunks now jutted into the night like broken spears. Smoke curled in the moonlight, carrying the sharp sting of scorched earth. The silence felt heavier than the chaos that had ripped through moments ago. Ethan staggered to his feet, still cradling Lyra's small body against his chest. She was breathing, shallow, uneven, but alive. Relief nearly dropped him to his knees again. "Hold on, Lyra," he whispered, his voice raw. "You're tougher than you look. I know you are." Her eyelids fluttered weakly. The glow in her eyes, that otherworldly silver, had dimmed to a faint glimmer, like embers fighting not to die out. Her blonde hair, tangled and streaked with ash, clung to Ethan's jacket. "Did I stop them?" she murmured, her voice so faint he had to bend close to hear. "You did," Ethan said, pressing his forehead against hers. "You stopped them, Lyra. They're gone." But he didn't add the truth twisting in his chest. "They'll be back." Predators that organized and relentless never stopped after a single failure. Tonight had been only the first battle. He shifted her carefully in his arms and scanned the wreckage. His shotgun lay twisted in the dirt, warped by the commander's strike. The cedar shelter was a collapsed heap. Their refuge was gone. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small in his own forest, a man staring up at a sky that held enemies beyond his reach. But then Lyra's fingers twitched, clutching weakly at his shirt. Her voice trembled. "Ethan, I was so scared you'd leave me." The words pierced deeper than any wound. He knelt, holding her close, steadying his breath. "I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? Not while you still need me." Her eyes shimmered with something between relief and sorrow. Then she went limp again, unconscious. Ethan's chest tightened. He pressed his ear to her ribs, counting each faint heartbeat. "Still here," he muttered, clinging to those fragile thuds as if they were his own lifeline. He carried her through the ruins until he found a shallow cave tucked beneath an overhang of rock. It wasn't much, damp, narrow, the floor cold, but it would hide them for the night. He laid her gently on his jacket, then lit a small fire with trembling hands. His ribs screamed with every movement, but he ignored the pain. His mind clung only to Lyra's breathing. By the flicker of firelight, he examined her. She was covered in ash and bruises, her tiny frame trembling with fever. But what unsettled him most were the burns on her palms, angry red where the light had burst forth. He touched them carefully, and she whimpered in her sleep. "Damn it, Lyra," his voice cracked. "You gave everything, didn't you?" He wrapped her hands with strips torn from his shirt, then sat back against the cave wall, exhausted. His body screamed for rest, but his mind wouldn't let go. He replayed the moment she stepped out from behind him, how she had chosen to risk herself for him, when she could have surrendered and lived. He thought of all the times he had told himself he didn't need anyone. That solitude was safer, cleaner, easier. And now here he was, bleeding, broken, and more terrified than he'd ever been, because he couldn't imagine a world without her. The firelight flickered across her face. She looked so fragile, so impossibly human in sleep. He found himself brushing a lock of golden hair from her cheek, whispering without realizing it, "You don't belong to them. You don't belong in a cage, or as some specimen. You're free, Lyra, and I'll keep you that way." A lump formed in his throat. He clenched his fists against it, but the truth weighed too heavy to ignore. "You've already saved me too," he admitted softly. "I didn't even know I was still alive until you showed up." His voice broke. He pressed his palm against his eyes, fighting back tears he hadn't let himself shed in years. Out here, no one could see him, no one but her. And if she survived this night, she deserved to know the truth. Hours passed. The fire burned low, shadows dancing across the cave walls. Ethan drifted in and out of restless half-sleep, haunted by the memory of the commander's spear slamming into his chest, the light pouring from Lyra's hands, the way she had collapsed like a star burning itself out. Every time he woke, his hand went to her chest, checking for breath. Every time, relief flooded him anew. Toward dawn, Lyra stirred. She opened her eyes, groggy but alive. "Ethan." He leaned over her instantly, exhaustion forgotten. "I'm here." Her lips trembled. "Did you mean it? When you said you wouldn't let me go?" The question pierced him to his core. He could have answered with something careful, something safer. But in the pale dawn light, after everything they had survived, there was no room left for half-truths. "Yes," he said, steady and raw. "I meant every word." A faint smile curved her lips, weary but radiant. Her hand found his, curling weakly around his fingers. For the first time since the battle, Ethan let out a shaky laugh, relief spilling out of him like water. He pressed his forehead gently to hers. "Then hold on to that," he whispered, "because whatever comes next, we're facing it together." The sun rose over the forest, painting the sky in fire and gold. Smoke drifted through the trees, but the world felt quiet, almost sacred in the aftermath. Ethan sat at the cave's mouth, Lyra leaning against him, her head resting on his shoulder. His ribs still ached. His shotgun was ruined. The hunters would come again. But for now, in the fragile peace of dawn, there was only the warmth of her hand in his, and the certainty that neither of them would face the next storm alone. The forest was healing, but slowly. Days had passed since the battle, and the land still wore its scars: blackened trees, scorched earth, the smell of ash lingering after every breeze. But amid the ruin, life crept back, the stubborn sprout of a fern, the call of birds returning to cautious song. Inside the cave, Ethan and Lyra had done their own healing. Bandages wrapped Ethan's ribs, a constant reminder of how close he had come to dying. Lyra's hands were still blistered beneath the cloth strips, her luminous energy depleted, but her spirit glowed brighter than ever. One morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the cave's mouth, she sat with her knees hugged to her chest, watching dust motes dance in the air. Ethan crouched nearby, stoking their small fire, when she finally broke the silence. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you ever wonder why we survived?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at her, small, fragile, hair tangled but catching the light like spun gold. Her wide silver eyes weren't afraid, not anymore. They were searching, thoughtful. "What?" Ethan repeated. "Because we fought. Because you wouldn't give up." She shook her head gently. "No, I mean, out of all the people in this world, Why did you find me? Why wasn't it someone else? Why am I still here when the hunters wanted me gone? Ethan hesitated, staring into the fire. The flames reflected in his weary eyes. I don't know, Lyra. I've asked myself a lot of questions since that night. Why me? Why now? Why you? And I don't have the answers. He set down the stick he'd been using to prod the embers and leaned back against the cave wall, exhaling slowly. But I do know this. I've spent years hiding in these woods, running from my past, running from people. And then you came crashing into my life, terrified of me, thinking I was some monster. And somehow, you made me want to stop running. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. You think you were running from people, but maybe you were running from yourself. The words hit him like a silent arrow. He opened his mouth, then shut it, no defense forming. She was right. He had been running from guilt, from loss, from the hollow ache of believing he didn't deserve connection anymore. She scooted closer to him, her voice quiet but steady. You saved me, Ethan, but you don't see it. I saved you too. You think I'm fragile. You think I'm the one who needed protection. But the truth is, we needed each other. Ethan turned to her slowly, his face softened by the fire's glow. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're right. I didn't see it at first, but you've been holding me together this whole time. Her lips curved into a faint smile. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought humans were monsters. I was wrong. Maybe monsters are just what we imagine when we're too scared to see the truth. Ethan swallowed hard. And what truth is that? That sometimes, she said, closing her eyes, the thing we fear most is the very thing that saves us. The silence after those words wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. They sat there, leaning against each other, two survivors who had crossed the line between fear and trust. When the fire dwindled, Ethan stood, stepping outside the cave. The sky stretched wide and endless, streaked with pink and orange as the sun rose. He let the cool air fill his lungs, the world around him both scarred and alive. Lyra joined him, slipping her small hand into his. Together they stood at the cave's mouth, looking out at the broken forest. Do you think they'll come back? She asked quietly. Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. They will. Predators don't quit. Her fingers tightened around his. Then we'll be ready. Ethan looked down at her, surprised at the steel in her voice. She wasn't the trembling girl he'd first found cowering in the woods. She was something else now, stronger, braver, carrying scars she wasn't ashamed of. And he realized he was the same. Yeah, he said, squeezing her hand. We'll be ready. They walked a little further that morning, stepping through the ruined forest. Ethan helped her over fallen branches, and she pointed out the small signs of rebirth, a sapling sprouting near a charred log, a bird's nest hidden in the crook of a blackened tree. Life always comes back, she said with a gentle smile, even when everything looks dead. Ethan looked at her, and the words carried more weight than she realized. He had thought his own life was over long before she appeared, and yet here he was, walking beside someone who had given him reason to breathe again. The ache in his ribs, the stiffness in his body, the memories of violence, none of it disappeared. But alongside the pain was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. They returned to the cave before dusk, building another small fire. As shadows stretched long across the ground, Lyra curled beside him, her head resting on his chest. The steady rhythm of her breathing lulled him into calm. For a long while, Ethan stared into the flames, letting his thoughts unravel. Maybe they were fugitives now. Maybe hunters from beyond the stars would track them, and maybe one day the fight would come again. But that didn't matter tonight. What mattered was that they had found each other, not by chance, but because they were meant to. Ethan finally spoke, his voice steady and low. Lyra, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know one thing. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. Not anymore. Her hand slid across his chest, resting over his heart. And neither will you. They sat there until the fire burned to embers, the night wrapping around them like a promise. The forest healed slowly, but it healed nonetheless. Weeks passed, and the charred scars left by the hunter's assault softened under the resilience of nature. Green began to push through the ash. Rivers sang louder as snowmelt returned, and the canopy once fractured began to weave itself whole again. Ethan and Lyra carved a quiet life among those trees. The cave became their shelter, but it was never their prison. By day, they ventured deeper into the woods, mapping out hidden clearings, learning where the berries grew, where deer left their trails. By night, they lay beneath the stars, her small body curled against his, speaking in whispers about futures they couldn't yet see but dared to dream of. Lyra had grown stronger. Her once trembling frame carried new confidence. Her luminous energy, though still fragile, no longer flickered in fear. She practiced shaping it into delicate orbs of light, sometimes just to make Ethan laugh when she juggled them in the dark. Other times, when silence settled heavy, she used the glow to remind him that shadows could not win. Ethan's body bore its reminders of battle: stiff ribs, aching scars, sleepless nights haunted by flashes of fire and steel. But unlike before, he didn't carry the weight alone. When the dreams woke him gasping, Lyra was there, pressing her small hand to his chest until his breath found its rhythm again. They were two broken beings who had found wholeness in each other. One evening, after a long trek through the woods, they stumbled upon a ridge that overlooked the valley. The sky above stretched vast and golden, painted by the last light of day. Lyra gasped, eyes wide as the wind tangled her pale hair. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, worth the climb." She turned to him, her silver eyes glowing with more than reflected sunlight. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought I wouldn't survive the night. I thought you'd end me right there." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Guess I disappointed you." Her laugh was soft but real. "You saved me, again and again, even from myself." He grew quiet, gazing at the horizon where fire-colored clouds kissed the earth. "I didn't save you, Lyra. We saved each other." She leaned against him, her small frame fitting against his side. The warmth of her presence was enough to silence the ghosts in his head. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a fugitive in his own life. He felt like a man who had something, someone, worth fighting for. But beyond the peace, the threat lingered. They knew the hunters might return. The galaxy beyond Earth was wide and ruthless, and Lyra's existence was a beacon to predators. They couldn't remain hidden forever. One night, while stars stretched endlessly overhead, Lyra finally voiced the thought that had been pressing between them. What if they come back? Ethan stared up at the sky, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. "Then we fight, or we run, or maybe we find others. People who'd stand with us." She frowned slightly. "Humans. Not just humans," Ethan said. "Anyone who believes we're worth protecting. Anyone who believes there's more to life than fear." Her gaze lingered on him, and slowly she smiled. "You sound like someone who believes in hope again." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Maybe I do." The days bled into weeks, and their bond deepened. They built a rhythm, gathering food, repairing tools, marking safe paths. They shared stories, Ethan of a life before the forest, Lyra of a world she might never see again. And somewhere in between, love grew, not in grand declarations, but in the way his hand always found hers, in the way she leaned into his shoulder without asking, in the way they learned each other's silences. The forest, once a refuge of isolation, became a cradle of connection. On a clear night, long after the fire had burned to embers, Lyra sat up and looked at the stars. Her voice carried a mix of wonder and resolve. "Do you think one day we'll leave this forest? Maybe even this world?" Ethan rose onto an elbow, studying her profile bathed in starlight. "Do you want to?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I don't want to run forever. I want to live, to see what else is out there. With you." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. The forest had been his cage for so long, but now, for the first time, the idea of leaving it didn't feel like loss. It felt like promise. Then one day, he said firmly, "We'll go. Together." Her hands sought his, fingers weaving tightly with his own. Together. The forest wind sighed around them, carrying away the ashes of fear, leaving behind the fragile but unbreakable truth of their bond. Two souls, scarred but unbroken. A human once lost, and an alien once terrified. In a world that had tried to tear them apart, They had found something worth more than survival. They had found each other. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, if you felt the weight of fear turn into hope, then this story was for you. Ethan and Lyra's journey reminds us that connection can grow in the unlikeliest of places, even between two beings who once thought they were enemies. What did you think of their story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your favorite moment. And if you want more tales of impossible bonds, survival, and love that defies every boundary, make sure to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting for you.